This project just reminded me how much I am scared of tailoring to the T. But no worries, no worries. This year, there's something I promised myself, and is to take on things I haven't done before in terms of like sewing and construction, so that way, I'm able to learn, grow, and become better. So in this video, I am going to be attempting to make a skirt vent, which is, that sort of slit opening you find at the back of skirts, jackets, on the side of trousers, and on the side of jackets as well. This is a detail that I've been wanting to try out for the longest time, but let's just say when it comes to technical sewing, that half a centimeter mistake would ruin the entire piece. I tend to just run away from it, but I'm going to be trying out in this video. I have done 2 trials prior to filming this, so this is going to be my 3rd attempt. Hopefully it goes well, hopefully it turns out all right. But let me show you guys the first and second attempt that I did. The first one I just did with like white plain calico, just to get a general idea and gist of how it works. You can see that it looks okay on this side, but the finishing on the inside wasn't as nice as I would have. So I went ahead to do it again a second time, just like that back detail there. I did it this time with a white lining and pink material on the outside. It kind of came out like average-ish, especially with this inside bit right there, this particular bottom flap on this side. I wasn't very impressed with that, hence why I am trying this again a 3rd time. So I'm going to make the pattern in the beginning of this video. I went ahead to cut and I will sew the skirt, and let's see if I'm actually able to nail it a 3rd time. Fingers crossed. I'm going to be using my basic skirt pattern for this project. I have my front and my back, which I have made in a previous tutorial. If you haven't seen already, I'm going to link it in the description box down below. So the first thing I did was I traced out my back, since that is the main focus of this tutorial. I traced it off, added my waist dart as well as a 1 centimeter seam allowance along the center back. Feel free to work with whichever seam allowance that you are comfortable with. Now for the vent itself, I decided to work with one that measures about 6 inches above the hemline, and I'm just marking that along the back. Now I went ahead to extend it by 6 centimeters or 2 inches outwards from that center back edge like so, and I'm going to be slanting that 6-inch point downwards like this. You can decide to have yours straight, but I just wanted to go for the slanted one like this. So I'm just adding a seam allowance all the way around, as well as a 2-inch hem allowance to the bottom of the skirt. So once you are done doing that, that is sort of like the main back skirt piece, which you will need to cut 2 pieces for, and then go ahead to work on your lining pieces. So now that we have our main skirt piece, I went ahead to trace the same shape onto another pattern paper, but this time around added a 1 centimeter hem allowance, because this is going to be the lining for the right hand side, I believe. So I'm just going ahead to cut out this pattern piece like so I can go in and work on the lining panels for the other side. So once you're happy with that, I went ahead to set the lining piece to the side, and then for my main skirt, I folded in the vent extension like this. So I'm folding along that center back edge, folding in the seam allowance, as well as that extension that we drew earlier on. Feel free to add some tape just to keep the fold nice and flat. Then I grabbed some pattern paper, and for the lining for the left hand side, you basically need to trace the inner edge of that vent extension. The whole point is it's kind of like a puzzle, and you want the pieces to fit together. That's one of the things about pattern pieces. The seam allowances need to match, the edges need to match. So oftentimes I would grab complementary patterns that are meant to work together to just be sure that they actually fit in the way that works. And if I have to make any corners to ensure that when I'm stitching that particular point, my life is a whole lot easier, I go ahead to do so. So I'm just adding a 1 centimeter seam allowance around this side, the bottom, and the center back as well. Add my annotation for this exact pattern piece, and then I'm going to cut it out to have my 3 pattern pieces I'm going to be needing for the back. The front essentially stays the same, it's just the back that gets this additional extension. And just remember, when you're cutting the left hand lining, you cut it on the other side of the pattern, so when you put them against each other, they connect in this manner. So I'm going in now to cut out my fabric pieces using the patterns I just made. I'm cutting out my main skirt in this woven pink material, and then my lining in a white linen cotton fabric. So once you have all of your pieces, you should end up with 2 pieces for your back, and then you should end up with 1 each piece for your lining, one that sort of protrudes out at the bottom and one that goes in at the bottom, so when you put them together they work. Just remember to label which side is left and which side is right, because I found that very confusing when I didn't do that. So in terms of sewing, the first thing I'm doing here is I am joining that center back hem, and because I want my zip on the center back, I'm leaving the top edge open. So I'm joining from about the hip point down to the edge of the extension. So when I get to this corner like so, I leave my needle in, raise my footer and turn towards this direction like so, and I stop 1 centimeter or half an inch just before the edge. So I went ahead to press everything nice and flat, and it's looking really good already. And if you don't even want to have a lining, you can already fold the hem the edges and just work with the piece like that. But because I want to line this piece, the first thing I'm going to be doing is to top stitch along the edges that we just sewed together, and I'm going to be sewing in direction of the fold. So it's important you turn this thing in the right direction, because if you don't, the lining panels would not connect to the inner side of your skirt. So now that I have that top stitched in place, that top stitch is also going to prevent the seam from breaking. When you wear the garment over time, it's going to keep the fold on in this side, like you can see here. Some people like to add an extra stitch, so they have a pair of stitch to conceal and to hold down that side of the garment. So now that this is all done, I'm going to go ahead and work on my lining pieces. I've pinned together the center back bottom edge, and I'm going to be sewing from the hip point downwards to the edges where that extension starts. So I'm starting from my hip point like so and sewing downwards and stopping at the edge, and then I'm going to be turning both sides of my lining so they meet at this point where one side protrudes out and one side dips in. If you have to make tiny incisions to make that stitch a lot smoother, feel free to do so. So I'm going to be sewing on my 1 centimeter seam allowance. I think this was one of the trickier parts of the whole stitching. I found this project to be more stitch intensive than actually pattern intensive. So just be careful when you're sewing, and you might need to redo some seams if you're not happy with the outcome. So after doing that, you should end up with a lining panel that looks like this. Give it a nice press to relax all of your seams, and then you can join this to your main skirt along the vent extension edges. However, remember to leave that 1 centimeter edge, because that would let you join the lining onto your main skirt. So I'm just going to grab my main skirt piece, and I'm going to be putting right sides together. So right side of the lining to the right side of the skirt. And I am going to be joining the edges on the inside of the skirt like so. So I like to always add pins because they make my life a lot easier, and I'm going to be sewing up this end up until the edge, and do that for the other side as well. So starting from the bottom, remembering to leave 1 centimeter at the beginning of your stitch, because that will let you join the lining onto the hemline of your skirt. And when you stitch the other side, you want to stop 1 centimeter or half an inch before the edge of your stitch, because that will also let you join the lining onto the hemline of your skirt. So when you turn this inside out, this is what it should look like, and you can give it a nice press if you want. But if you're happy with the outcome at this point, you can go ahead and join the lining hemline to the skirt hemline. I think this is what really makes or breaks the project. For this other side that is nice and straight, is relatively straightforward. You essentially just sew the lining to the hem on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and you should have a corner on this end which you would stitch down flat. This is the side that gave me a lot of headache. So first up, I went ahead to sew about, I would say, 2 centimeters first on that corner, and then stitched on a 1 centimeter seam allowance the lining onto the skirt, and then turn it inside out to check to see if you are satisfied with the finish. So after doing this, I realized I had to go back in and hand stitch, especially the corner that had the width that was the main material and the skirt. I had to go back in and hand stitch certain parts because it didn't just look really good. I wasn't just happy with it essentially, so I had to go back in, unpick and redo it a few times before I ended up at this point. And even though I'm not 100% happy with it so far, so if you are doing this yourself, just be mindful when you're connecting that bottom edge that has the same material as the main and the lining, and when you're connecting the lining to the hemline of the skirt. I hope that made sense. But once that is all done, you're sort of done with the vent extension or the slit opening. You can go ahead and add your zip on the center back if you left your center back open, and you could add it on the side. So I'm just going ahead to connect the lining along the waistline and along that zip edge to finish off the entire back piece. Once you do that, you sort of have your full back skirt ready to be attached to the front. So just for the sake of anyone who wants to know how you connect the front to the back of the skirt when you sew in the lining like this, I essentially just went ahead to give everything a nice press once I was done with attaching the lining along the waistband and as well as along that zip edge on the inside. And once you look in like this, it looks even really nice and tidy. So for the front, I essentially cut the front straight along the hem. I made the lining shorter, and once I was done stitching the waistline and the hemlines, I gave it a nice press, and I know I can join this to the back skirt along the side seams. So I'm going to be putting right sides together of my front to my backs, and I'm essentially going to be joining the front main skirt to the back main skirt and the lining pieces to the lining pieces. So you essentially need to turn it inside like this, so you have all of the main skirt, which is the pink side, and you have the lining, which is the cream or the white piece. So when you join up one side, for the other side you need to leave, I would say, about 3 to 4 inches open, because that will let you turn the entire skirt inside out. So you need to do the entire, either decide to have your left hand side completely closed or your right hand side completely closed, and then on one of the seams leave a little hole open, because that way you are able to turn your skirt inside out. So once you're done stitching all of your seams and you've been able to bag it all out like this, you can go ahead and close off the opening that you left using a tiny edge stitch on your machine. So I'm just going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew up that hole close on an edge stitch to finish up the skirt project. So this is the skirt all done. I will try it on to give you guys a better idea of how it sits on my body. In terms of the overall outcome, I will still rate myself average, if I'm being very honest, because everything else turned out like really nice. It was just this particular bottom edge here, especially this corner that just dips in towards that area. I'm not really happy with that, so I think I will try this again on a day that I'm feeling up to the task. Like, even the inside looks really nice and tidy, but that bottom area, man, like, look at that, the zip and the lining and everything just looks really good. And then you look at that place there and you're just like, what happened? So that is the outcome of this tutorial. I think it's still useful to a reasonable extent. So if you're trying this out for the first time, you get an idea of how it works, and just to be careful in terms of finishing the hem on the back. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any tips, any tricks, anything that I should know that would help me improve this skirt design, make sure to share it in the comment section down below. If you're going to be attempting this as well, I would love to see your outcome. Make sure to tag me on Instagram at KimDaveDesigns. And yeah, that's it for this tutorial. I think I'll do this again though, honestly. I will still wear it too. I will still wear it. don't even get it twisted. I will still wear it because I've been working on this skirt for 2 days, so I will still wear it. But I think if I really want to be happy with the outcome, I will do this another time and really figure out why this place did not just, you know, smoothing out the way I want it to. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comment section down below, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.